Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses Live with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's Wednesday the 9th of June. It's a beautiful sunny day here in London. At last, we have some lovely weather and it's show number 144. And Clive has already looked in and said, hello, good morning, Clive. Got a fairly packed show for you again today. I'm going to be looking at the apparent or the possible reversal of the plan for compulsory airbag jackets in Spain. A manufacturer from the Netherlands which is putting retro-reflective where it's needed on bike kit. KYMCO have signed up to manufacturers to their swappable battery system. We'll take a look at another MASH motorcycle because I quite like it. And today's talking point when we get to the end of the show is what makes for a dangerous road. So settle yourself down for the next 25-30 minutes or so. And don't forget, you can join me here every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. If you've got anything you want to add, comments, feedback, questions, anything you'd like me to cover in another show, do drop me a line through the comment stream and I will try to get back to you while I'm on air. If I don't do it on air, I will respond to you at the end of the show. So, okay, on with the what we've got to talk about today. Well, I'm going to start with a little bit about myself, actually, so I don't talk about myself all that often. It's been a pretty busy week, actually, for the last 7 days. On Thursday last week, I ran my first on-road course since my emergency operation back at the beginning of May, and that's all going very well, thank you, the recovery from that. So I'm certainly looking to get more training booked in now the weather's nice and sunny. So I'll just remind you, I do have start points all around the M25, Waltham Abbey area, which takes us on some great roads out into Essex. And more on those roads in a moment, actually, when I talk about what makes a dangerous road. St Albans, we have some good roads out there onto the top of the Chilterns, out near Dunstable Downs. Great views on a nice day and some great twists and turns too. Egham takes us out towards Twyford and across the Thames Valley area. It's not so hilly, but again, there are some beautiful roads and some pretty tricky ones. My start point for Kent is now Lee Green on the South Circular Road, because otherwise it takes me about 90 minutes to get out of town. But even so, we're fairly quickly out onto the North Downs and some roads with some nice views and some really good bends as well. So if you're interested in a session on any of those areas, do drop me a line. Now, as you probably know, I had to run Sunday's Elevenses now earlier than normal as I was delivering a presentation to a ROSPA group out in Cambridgeshire via Zoom, incidentally. The feedback was good. Certainly got some people talking and asking some pointed questions back at me, which is always nice because it means I can give you a little bit more detail about what I've just said. But I have to be honest, the talk did need a bit of editing down. It was a bit too long. It's a brand new one, needed a little bit of polishing up. So I'll revisit that and do it for next time. On Monday evening, I gave the first of my invite-only talks to my coffee supporters and subscribers as a thank you. The talk was essentially how not to crash in corners exposition, and not just covering the usual better biking skills that is what we normally think about as advanced riding, but also genuinely look at where things go wrong on these kind of twisty roads and telling you how to stay out of trouble on these kind of roads too. I covered 2 unique selling points on these courses, which you won't find in Roadcraft or the IAM syllabus. And that's the reference point system to corners, which essentially is a roadmap of how to find your way around any specific bend and how to map the machine controlled inputs into exactly the right places. Really, really simplifies riding bends when you know the roadmap. And my quick steering point and squirt approach, which helps us on twisty roads. And finally, I converted the entire counter-steering series of posts which have been on Facebook into a mini ebook which you can download from my coffee shop. That's available as and when you would like to get hold of it. You can head over there now if you want to, or at the end of the show, or whenever you like. £3 gets you over 30 pages of essential knowledge on how a bike steers. And whilst I'm on the topic, I'll just give a shout out to Paul Varnsbury, who you probably know I interviewed here last year and is a regular visitor himself, a regular commenter actually on Elevenses. And he's put his head together with the Bennett Social website team, and he's produced a video which answers a question of just how good is a set of £215 leathers. It's an hour long. So it's a little bit in depth. It does take some chewing your way through, as it were, but I have to say it's well worth watching. I've already put the link up in the comments. I can't tell you what they found because there's actually a legal statement on the video which prevents their results from being quoted, presumably to stop the supplier of these leathers claiming that they are as good as they say they are. But I will tell you that the leather held up decently, the impact protectors didn't. But for more on that, do go over there and watch that video. It may take an hour of your day, but it's well worth watching. Right, enough about me. What's been going on in the news? Well, it's being reported that the Spanish General Directorate of Traffic, the DGT, are considering postponing the plan for the compulsory wearing of airbag vests or jackets by motorcyclists after representations from motorcycle rider groups. Now, I reported this some weeks ago on Elevenses and actually pointed out that I was surprised by the number of riders who seem to be perfectly happy to adopt an airbag. But they would have been compulsory on interurban roads from 2026. Now, the DGT, the government body, they argue that airbag clothing is comfortable to wear, which I have to say I suspect is probably not the case in a hot climate. And they say it's the best passive safety invention since the helmet. They believe the move would reduce the number of motorcycling fatalities by protecting the neck, spine and trunk. But the report suggests that if riders' representatives consider that they don't save lives, then the DGT would consider postponing the legislation. So Maria Jose Alonso, who's the spokeswoman for the Motorists Platform for Road Safety, is quoted as saying, "Now more airbags are being sold than ever, thanks to the fact we are reporting people are acquiring them out of conviction and not obligation. This is the way." In other words, saying that people should be free to choose, but not forced to wear airbag clothing. Now, as usual, the problem that I see is that we don't really know how well the airbags do work, and we don't really know what they protect us from. Now, airbags first appeared on the racetrack, and along with other improvements in circuit design, they almost certainly provide extra protection in the kind of full slide and bounce crash that you'll see in something like MotoGP. And it's notable that there have been relatively few fatal crashes in circuit competition in recent years, just 8 in over 3 decades as it happens. Now contrast that with almost 100 in the previous 4 decades since the series started just after the Second World War. You can see that there have been major strides in improving both the circuits and the design of safety clothing. But there's no guarantee that a falling rider will simply slide to a halt. Now, rather sadly, Jason Dupasquier, he was killed at the Italian GP just 10 days ago after falling and being hit by another rider. It's being described as a freak accident, but the fact is that of those riders I've just mentioned who have been killed in the last 30 years, several of those died after falling and then being struck by either their own bike or another motorcycle. And that's why I think it's far less clear how well they'll help on the road, where frankly, an impact with roadside furniture is quite likely. That's what makes the Isle of Man TT so deadly. And it's certainly debatable how much protection they offer in a collision with a vehicle, particularly on faster roads, which is where the Spanish authorities wanted to mandate their use. The first thing to say is that the cheaper airbag jackets that are activated by a lanyard attached to the bike itself would seem to be too slow to fully inflate before the body rider's body actually impacts the vehicle they've just hit. It's only the more expensive electronically activated jackets, which are triggered by accelerometers attached to the motorcycle's front end, that are actually rapid enough, and they do go off in as little as 25 milliseconds, which is pretty damn quick. But I would say that there's a second issue here, and that's what we hit when we crash into something. If we hit a car, the danger is that we hit the passenger compartment, and that simply because of the relative heights of the motorcycle we're sitting on and the vehicle we're likely to be hitting. That means that our head is likely to impact the big bar that runs along the top of the passenger compartment, the stiffening at the roofline effectively for the safety cage. And in fact, one of the videos used by an airbag manufacturer to promote their product and showing how fast it goes off actually shows exactly that kind of impact. And of course, the jacket goes off around the chest and the neck, but the helmet area is left completely unprotected to hit the roof line of the car, and it is one of the stiffest parts of the body shell. The front and rear ends have crumple zones, but the side impact is designed to be really strong to protect the occupants. Not really surprising, is it? So I would say there's some doubt about how an airbag will work in terms of a side-on collision. There seems to be a lot of speculation, basically, about how they will work, and it seems to be based mostly on manufacturers' promotional material. I would like to see some genuine, hard evidence of how they work before, frankly, people are forced to spend cash on another layer of clothing. And frankly, the big danger with all these kind of things is what they do is they add a layer of invulnerability in the rider's brain without necessarily adding that protection in real life. Now, another area where we seem to have a lot of dodgy manufacturer information flying about is rider conspicuity, and that's one of the reasons that I have been so busy with the Science of Being Seen project. One of the issues that I have talked about is the need for clothing to actually help a driver recognize that what they're looking at is actually a motorcycle and rider. For instance, one of the problems with much motorcycle clothing is it's multicolor. So the panels and the stripes and the patterning actually acts as what's known as disruptive camouflage by breaking up the outline of the rider. And that's true even if you have bright colors on your clothing. It doesn't necessarily work the way we think it does. When you have to look at military camouflage to see that. So the solution is actually to use a single color of jacket and trousers, and preferably match the bike as well, so that you create a solid silhouette which is far more likely to be rapidly identified as bike and rider. Now at night, I've also pointed out the same problem with reflective material. If you look at a lot of clothing, it's got little stripes, it's got little patches, it may have a sort of decorative pattern of retro reflective material on, but basically we have the same problem. Unless you get a recognizable shape, those strips and patches are effectively useless. And anyway, they only bounce back the light to someone who is sitting directly behind the light source. So think about the classic Smidsy crash. The driver is at an angle to the bike and there is no light from that driver's headlights falling on the approaching motorcycle, so there's nothing to bounce back. So the reflective material is effectively useless. And there's a big problem as well with where we tend to wear high-vis. If you think about where the conventional high-vis sort of traffic pattern jacket with the H pattern stripes up and over the shoulders and round the waist, it's all high up. It's way above the zone where you are lighting up a bike's with your headlights. So have a look at this photo here. Let me zoom in on that a bit. What you'll see is that the bike in front of the bike with the headlight on, the rider is wearing, it's me actually, wearing a traffic style vest with the H pattern banding, and you'll notice that that retro reflective material isn't being illuminated at all. But what is being lit up is the rear number plate and the two big panels of retro reflective material on the leg of my aero stitch. But there's a junction just in front of me, and again, if there was a car there, you could see quite clearly that that light would not bounce off my high-vis reflective material. So that's why I've argued that riders should be using something like the ghost jackets that have been adopted by runners or cyclists, where the whole jacket is actually reflective. Because what they do is they give a sort of a whole torso shape, as it were, to the rider when the light is bounced back. And they don't work on the full retroreflective principle either. They actually work well under diffuse lighting, under street lights, also from light scatter from other vehicles. And so they glow under these conditions rather than shine brightly. And they're actually surprisingly effective. So I was pleasantly surprised when a message dropped up on my bike forum the other day saying someone at Macna have been reading SOBs. We have bike clobber along the lines of what Kevin recommended, the Macna Night Eye motorcycle clothing. So here's the link to the website I've just said. I'll just repeat what I said then for the last couple of seconds. Basically, those night eye pants have got their reflectivity on the calves where you need them for to be illuminated by a dipped beam. Thanks everybody. Yes, you're hearing me. I accidentally nudged the mic mute button. The couple of points about them is that the CE rating is only an A, which means basically urban use. But you know, that's probably where they'll be of most benefit to you. So I wouldn't see that as a game changer too badly. The other thing is that there are Dutch companies. So at the moment, all the retail shops are only in the Netherlands. They don't appear to have suppliers outside the Netherlands, and neither do they appear to have online retailing sorted out. But as I say, nevertheless, a step in the right direction. So there's the link. You can go and have a look at that yourselves and figure out what you're looking at over there. I think they hopefully will set off a trend. Right, so who's here today? Clive already mentioned. Guy said good morning. Hallam said, sorry you missed the talk at Over. Yes, never mind. I don't think they recorded it, Hallam. I didn't, because they had control of the show. So perhaps they can do a recording over there. I don't know. So, right, okay, we're about halfway through, so I'll rock it on. Electricity is a pretty universal fuel, but there's a problem with its packaging. We've already seen that manufacturers of different brands for cars are using different charger shapes, and even the infrastructure which they put up to allow you to charge your car isn't universal. In some places, you can only charge your Tesla, for example. So there's likely to be a similar kind of problem with removable battery packs for lightweight motorcycles, as several different standards are already arising. I've already mentioned the Yamaha have signed up to one standard. Well, the latest to try to get a sort of an ecosystem of batteries going is KYMCO, the Taiwanese manufacturer. And they've just announced they've signed up to electric motorcycle manufacturers to its INX battery swapping system. And these are Super SOCO and FELO technologies. Now, Super SOCO we've seen before, notably, I think when they introduced a 10% discount for healthcare workers last March during the first lockdown. And they manufacture a range of bikes and scooters from sort of urban mopeds right up to a sort of 60-mile-per-hour retro-inspired, a sort of 125 equivalent, I would call it. FELO Technologies I've not heard of before, but they are also a Chinese manufacturer, and they offer a range of rather sharp-looking urban scooters, but they also do some rather odd-looking all-terrain sort of scooter motorcycle crossover things. The argument is, of course, that once you've got an ecosystem going, you're going to be more likely to survive. But unfortunately, KYMCO are already up against the Gogoro or Gogoro, I don't know, network, and they have they predated KYMCO on this swapping technology by several years, and it's currently the largest battery swapping network in the world. And there are over 2,000 swap stations to choose from in Taiwan. They say you're never more than a couple of minutes away from a swap station in the capital, Taipei. Gogoro or Gogoro also maintain ownership of the batteries themselves, which lowers the initial purchase price of their bikes, and they've just basically announced some deals with Indian manufacturer Hero, who are actually the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer, and Yadea, who are the world's largest electric two-wheel manufacturer, and DCJ, who are China's largest two-wheel maker. So that's access to sort of a huge markets, and in fact over 1/3 of the world's riders. Why have battery swapping? Well, I've answered this one before. The answer is simple enough. If, like me, you don't have a garage, and there's likely to be a lack of on-street parking with charging infrastructure, I can't really string a 240-volt cable across the pavement. So a rechargeable or removable or swappable battery makes a lot of sense for a sort of a lightweight motorcycle. You can then park the bike securely somewhere else and bring the battery indoors to charge. Or if range is a problem, you can simply swap out the battery when you get a bit low. And certainly, as I said, in Taipei, that's a big plus. So, okay, if the FELO is, that was quite a sharp looking little scooter, contrast that with this gargantuan creation. It is, I hope, just a design sketch. I don't think it's seen the light of day. It's not entirely clear from the story, but basically that is from the pen of Rodrigo Magra Manaus. It's called a KF33 electric motorcycle. Makes you wonder what KF 01 to 32 looks like. It's labelled as a BMW, oddly enough, but I think the label's probably about as close as it gets to anything BMW are likely to put their name to. At least I hope they won't. I do really dislike the current trend for putting diarrhea-coloured seats on everything, and those strange wings down by where your feet would live are perfectly placed for smashing an ankle if you crash, are actually heat exchangers from the motor. Frankly, I think it's ghastly, and it's a good reason that designers should be kept well away from motorcycles. Nevertheless, every now and again, I think designers do get it more right than wrong, and this is one where I just feel that the lines actually aren't as all that bad. It's another new machine from the French manufacturer Mash. Now, last week I talked about the Mash 600, which, although it was a single, had a distinct look of a classic Triumph Bonneville twin about it. This bike is driven by the same 650 single engine, and the retro look this time, I think, evokes the old XT500, XT600 Yamahas in its lines, although the front wheel is only a 17-inch. Basically 39 horsepower, 643 engine, which pumps out 45 Newton meters of torque via a 5-speed gearbox. You won't get too far on a 12-litre tank, but it does mean that the bike is a 177 kilos, which is 390 pounds in old money, and that makes it something of a featherweight by today's standards. The seat is pretty high though, at 870 millimeters or 34 inches. Well, that does look fairly narrow, so that could partly compensate, but that is quite a high seat. Instruments are analog, LED illumination. Seat does actually look 2 people big. It's not diarrhea coloured, which is a huge bonus, and there is a pillion grab rail plus what looks like a mini rack on the back. I did mention the 17-inch front wheel, which matches the 17-inch at the rear. You should get a 120 and a 150 tires on those. Gold rims, gold right the way up forks, single discs, and ABS. 2 years spares and parts and labour warranty, unlimited mileage, and it's got a rather attractive price point as well, €5,599, which works out at just under £500 at current exchange rates. So, okay. What else was I going to say? Don't forget that you can set your reminder to get Elevenses on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. That's my normal time. Last week was an aberration. And you can check up with these shows on my YouTube channel if you missed them. Right, okay, so on to the last bit today, today's talking point. Here's a good question. What makes for a dangerous road? Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, one of my training venues is out near Waltham Abbey and runs out into Essex. I do make a point of briefing trainees on the fact that those roads do have some risks. They actually have a higher than average crash rate compared with most rural roads. Now, I was out on those roads on Thursday, and on the Sunday evening, a bike crash report appears in my newsfeed. And it turned out that the crash had actually happened on one of the very roads we used on our return run, the B1051, which runs towards Stansted Airport between Thaxted and Broxted. And the result was not wonderful. There's not much in the news there except to say that the air ambulance was called out for what appears to have been a collision between a car and a motorcycle. The rider, who was in his 60s, had to be airlifted to hospital after the collision early on Saturday afternoon, and he's been left with life-changing leg injuries, as they say. So I can only wish him a speedy recovery. Now, by complete coincidence, I overheard via the internet, of course, someone saying that he'd been out with his eye observer, not on those same roads, admittedly, but he'd been briefed again on the fact that the roads were more dangerous than average, and he kind of a little bit smugly said that there was nothing actual dangerous about them at the pace he was riding. Now, that first of all hinted that maybe he would have been riding those rides a little bit quicker minus his observer, but it also made me wonder whether he was seeing the road in the same way that I would. And it got me thinking. Some years ago I wrote a piece about the A262, which is one of the roads in Kent. It's another dangerous road, and it's another one for training. And the road actually featured on a series on the BBC called, rather dramatically, Britain's Killer Roads. It does do reruns from time to time, and it is worth watching for some insights. And they looked at a bunch of roads around the country, all with one thing in common. They all had a high accident rate, and they each suffered a recent fatal accidents. Now, I don't know if you have come across the EuroRAP ranking system. This isn't the European Roads Assessment Programme. It's an international not-for-profit association which offers basically an internationally recognised assessment standard, which can be used by governments, consumers, engineers, anybody basically, to give a measure of the safety of the road. The members are motoring organisations, national and regional road authorities, and experts who have been specially selected to contribute. And basically it's a sister programme to Euro NCAP, which I'm sure you have heard of, which is the test programme that crashes new vehicles and gives them a rating. Now, the roads in question mostly featured in the high or medium classification on these EuroRAP rankings. And the presenter, Joe Crowley, he looked at the circumstances of each fatal accident. Now, to be candid, it wasn't totally objective. There was a lot of unsubstantiated opinion, and they steered well clear of the thorny issue of what the drivers and riders involved in those fatal accidents might actually have done themselves. But they did show a video of each road to a chap called John Dawson, who at the time was chairman of EuroRAP, and he gave his expert opinion on the infrastructure issues of the roads concerned. So I was particularly interested to see what he had to say about the stretch of the A262, which runs from the junction of the A21 at Lamberhurst to the junction of the A229 just north of Cranbrook. Some of you probably do know the road. In this case, the fatal accident actually happened at Goudhurst and involved a motorcyclist, and it was at the junction next to the Chequers Inn. The rider killed was actually an off-duty police officer. She was a 39-year-old woman. She was riding a motorcycle over 500 cc's, and she was in collision with a car. Now, the exact circumstances were not clear, and I'm still a little bit in the dark myself. I think from what I heard later, that she hit the rear of a vehicle, but I can't substantiate that for you. But what I can tell you is, from personal experience of riding through it and trying to get out of the junction, it is a truly nasty little problem. Let me show you a photograph which I've lifted from good old Google Maps to give you a hint of the problem. There it is. Now, you'll probably notice that the first thing is you can't actually see a junction on the left in that photo at all. But what you should be able to spot is the warning sign that tells you that one's coming up. The building itself, the pub there, totally obscures the driver's view of the lane on the left. And until you're right on top of it, unless you've spotted that warning sign, it's almost impossible to be aware that there is actually a junction there at all. And of course, that means at the same time that anybody trying to emerge from behind the pub can't see to their right. So if given that the road is also quite busy, it carries a lot of commuter traffic, so it's busy morning and evening, and it carries a lot of goods traffic during the day. Drivers are often struggling to get out of that one into a gap in the traffic anyway. So combine that with a virtually non-existent view to the right, and you should be able to begin to see some of the problems. And it's made worse by the angle of the junction. If you're turning left, the minor road actually joins the main road at a bit of an acute angle. So what it basically means is that you have to look a long way back over your shoulder to see what's happening. So, okay, all things considered, the actual mechanics of getting in and out of that junction are tricky, but it gets even worse. If you notice, if you look very carefully, you should see that the road actually narrows slightly. So if you've got an oncoming HGV heading towards you, the tendency is to move over to the left, which of course makes it more difficult to see the junction. And if you're riding a motorcycle and you stay well to the left, out of the way of the HGV coming the other way, you will be almost invisible until the very last second to anybody trying to pull out of that junction. They have resurfaced it. It was a very poor surface as well, which didn't help. And you'll notice that there is actually an anti-skid surface there in front of you. So that should give you a clue about some of the problems. And one final little tip: if you look up in the top corner, just behind the car that's disappearing off around the corner on the top left, you should just see a piece of white paint there by the the wall of the building, and that basically is trying to force oncoming vehicles away from the building and out into the road, which gives you again a further clue about the problems of seeing out of that junction. And just to add sort of the icing to the cake, the national speed limit on that junction used to be just the other side of that junction. They've now moved it several hundred meters down the road. The locals have been pointing a finger at speeding motorcyclists, but the chief constable of Kent, who was Ian Learman at the time, actually answered a question like that and was surprisingly open-minded. And he did say that some motorcycles are pretty loud and may not be speeding. And he did ask if people had actually seen them for themselves. So the question I posed next was, do riders themselves see this as a particularly dangerous road? If you pop the A262 into Great Biking Roads, which was a website, don't know if it's still there, hopefully it is, you'll come up with a number of routes that actually use the 262, but no one marks it more than average for hazards. Now, that makes me think that the rider who thought that the road that the IAM observer was warning him about was actually missing the clues rather than competent enough to deal with them. The hazard line there in that picture is one of the first things I would see. The sign that tells you there is a junction to the near side, the very fact there's a sign there should tell you there have been crashes. If you look to the in front of you, you can see the anti-skid surface, which also tells you something about what happens at this junction, people braking late and at the last second. And I already mentioned that little white line, which is poking you away from the building, the vision blocker, trying to open up your line of sight and the driver's line of sight to get a better chance of you. Okay, so there are warning signs there. The problem, I would say, is that the road looks almost straight, and people are tempted to ride too quickly along there. But it basically, the problem is, like any junction here, is that it's blind. And if there is a vision blocker hiding a surprise horizon behind it, and if you don't know what they are, go onto my Facebook page and you'll find out. If you do a search on topics on those, there are plenty of articles about them. Blind junctions are always a hazard, and the road signs and the road markings and those anti-skid surfaces in particular are always there for a reason. Now, one platitude that's often trotted out when we talk about roads like this is that there are no dangerous roads, only dangerous drivers. But as John Dawson said on the program, he said, we need a road system designed for ordinary human beings who make mistakes. Those who willfully choose not to obey the rules of the road should be punished, but everyday human driving errors should not be punished with a death sentence, which really is the topic that I was talking about indirectly in the presentation that I gave on Sunday last. Right, okay, so apologies for the sound boo-boos there. That's entirely my fault. So that's the end of today's show. As we run on a little bit, I'll knock it on the head fairly quickly. Don't forget, you can head over to my Ko-fi page and you can download the new book. There are also books to read over at Lulu, where my publisher is offering my paperbacks. We've got the YouTube channel, of course, where you can catch up with the 60-second safety videos and all the previous episodes of Elevenses. So, right, okay, that'll do for today. Apologies once again for the sound glitches. I hope it didn't spoil your enjoyment of the show too much. Thanks for looking in. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you again hopefully next time out. Bye for now.